The day I opened my late son's old leather-bound journal, I realized his death, and everything my daughter-in-law told me about his $500,000 trust fund, was a lie. My name is Claire Dorsey. I'm 68 years old, and for 35 years I taught English at Riverside High School in Portland, Oregon. Nothing glamorous, nothing complicated, just honest work helping teenagers understand Shakespeare and punctuation. My son Caleb was 34 when he died, just beginning to build the architecture practice he'd dreamed about since college. He was a thoughtful man, the kind who still called every evening to ask about my day, who remembered the anniversary of his father's death without me having to remind him. My late husband, Henry, used to be the love of my life. We met at a bookstore when we were both 25, married 3 years later, and welcomed Caleb after 5 years of hoping. For 17 years, we were solid. Sure, we had our struggles like any family, but I never imagined I'd lose him to cancer when Caleb was still a teenager. Before he died, Henry set up a trust fund, $500,000 that Caleb could access at 30, meant to give our son the security and freedom to pursue his passions. Caleb's wife, Vanessa, seemed like a blessing when they first met. She worked as a financial consultant at Mercer and Associates, always impeccably dressed, always 3 steps ahead of every conversation. She stood 5 feet 7 inches with glossy dark hair styled in that way that looks effortless but probably takes an hour, and blue eyes that sparkled when she talked about optimizing assets and building wealth. At first, I thought she was exactly what Caleb needed, someone organized, ambitious, someone who could handle the practical side of life while he dreamed up beautiful buildings. My younger sister, Patricia, lives 2 blocks away in the same neighborhood where we grew up. She's 3 years younger than me, built sturdy like our mother, with silver hair she's worn short since her 50s and hands that always smell like the lavender she grows in her garden. Patricia never had children of her own, always said she had enough with mine. She loved Caleb like he was hers, taught him to bake bread when he was 12, and never missed one of his architecture school presentations. The lawyer's office felt too cold the day my world tilted sideways. Vanessa sat across from me in the conference room at Whitmore and Associates. Her black dress probably cost more than I spent on groceries in 3 months. She dabbed at her eyes with a monogrammed handkerchief, though I noticed those tears never actually fell. Her attorney, Richard Sutton, was the kind of lawyer you see in magazines, silver-haired, 3-piece suit, voice smooth as butter. He had a way of making terrible news sound inevitable. "Mrs. Dorsey," Sutton said, his words measured and careful, "as executor of Caleb's estate, I need to inform you that the trust fund established by your late husband was liquidated 6 months before your son's passing. The assets were transferred to a joint account held by Caleb and Vanessa, which, per Oregon law, now belongs entirely to Mrs. Vanessa Dorsey as the surviving account holder." Vanessa looked directly at me, her voice soft but firm. "I'm so sorry, Claire. Caleb made these decisions. He wanted us to invest the money together, in our future. I tried to talk him into keeping you informed, but you know how independent he could be." Every word felt like a slap because I knew my son. Caleb had been planning to fund his architecture studio, to build affordable housing for low-income families. He'd talked about it for years. The idea that he'd secretly emptied Henry's trust fund and told me nothing? But there were bank statements. Documents with Caleb's signature. Transfer records showing the money moving in stages over 3 months. Sutton walked me through each one with the patience of someone explaining something to a confused elderly woman. "I understand this is difficult," he said, sliding a folder across the polished mahogany table. "But everything was done legally. Caleb had full access to the trust at 33. He made his choices. I lost my ability to question that day, not legally, but emotionally. Vanessa kept the house they'd bought together, the savings accounts, the life insurance payout. Within 2 weeks of Caleb's funeral, she'd put the house on the market. Within a month, she'd moved to Arizona and bought a place in Scottsdale. Her Instagram showed poolside brunches and weekend trips to Sedona while I sat in Caleb's childhood bedroom, holding his old architecture textbooks and crying. The local newspaper's obituary had been simple: Caleb Henry Dorsey, 34, died in a single-car accident on Highway 26. He is survived by his mother, Claire, and his wife, Vanessa. I became the grieving mother who'd lost everything, my son, my husband's legacy, and my ability to understand why. But 6 months later, living in the same small house where I'd raised Caleb because it was all I had left, a package arrived on my doorstep. No return address. Just my name written in handwriting I'd recognize anywhere, Caleb's careful, architectural lettering. My hands shook as I opened the box. Inside was the leather-bound journal I'd given him for his 30th birthday, brown with gold-edged pages, the corners worn from use. I sat at my kitchen table and began to read. The early entries were mundane, work notes, building sketches, grocery lists. But 20 pages in, the tone shifted. Mom, if you're reading this, I was right about her. My breath caught. I turned the page. Vanessa's been moving money. I found transfers I never authorized, $15,000 here, $30,000 there. When I confronted her, she said she was investing our future. But I checked. The properties she claims to have bought don't exist. The LLC she created has no assets. She's draining the trust fund, and when I told her I was going to freeze the accounts, she said something I'll never forget: "You do that, and you'll regret it." My vision blurred with tears. I flipped forward frantically. She's been getting phone calls late at night. I recorded one. She was talking to someone named Eli, saying, "Once the money clears, he won't be a problem. We'll stage it carefully. No one questions a car accident in the rain. Mom, if anything happens to me, the proof is in my studio. Desk drawer, taped underneath. Flash drive labeled insurance. Don't let her get away with this. I love you. I'm sorry I didn't tell you sooner." The entry was dated 2 weeks before the accident that killed him. When I plugged that flash drive into my laptop, the one I found exactly where Caleb said it would be, I heard my daughter-in-law's voice planning my son's murder for money. That was the moment I understood. Caleb hadn't driven off Highway 26 in the rain by accident. He'd been murdered. And the woman who'd cried at his funeral, who'd called me Mom for 3 years, had orchestrated the whole thing. Now, before we continue, I'd really love to know where you are watching from. Drop it in the comments, because it warms my heart to see how far these stories reach. And if this one moved you, don't forget to like, subscribe, and keep walking with me through the journeys of love, pain, and the quiet lessons life whispers when we least expect them. Now let's continue. Life before tragedy struck was simple, but beautiful in its ordinariness. Every morning, I'd wake at 6 o'clock, brew coffee in the same ceramic pot Henry bought me on our 10th anniversary, and sit by the kitchen window watching the neighborhood come alive. The maple tree Caleb and his father planted when he was 8 still stood in the front yard, taller now than our house, its branches reaching toward a sky that seemed full of promise back then. Caleb had been an easy child, curious, gentle, the kind of boy who brought home injured birds and stayed up late reading books about architecture and city planning. He'd build elaborate structures out of cereal boxes and cardboard, explaining to me with absolute seriousness how the weight distribution worked, how form followed function. Even at 10 years old, he understood that buildings weren't just shelters, they were statements about how we valued people. Henry died when Caleb was 17. Pancreatic cancer, the kind that moves fast and shows no mercy. I remember sitting in the oncologist's office, holding my husband's hand while the doctor explained we had months, not years. Henry took the news with the quiet dignity he'd shown his entire life, but that night, in our bedroom with the door closed, he wept against my shoulder. "I won't see him graduate," he whispered. "I won't see him become the man he's meant to be." "He's already becoming that man," I told him. "Because of you." 3 weeks before Henry passed, he called our financial advisor to the house. His body had withered to almost nothing by then, but his mind remained sharp. I sat beside his hospital bed, the one we'd set up in the living room so he could watch the seasons change through the window, while he outlined his plan. "The life insurance will keep Claire comfortable," he said, his voice barely above a rasp. "But Caleb needs something more. Something that gives him freedom to chase his dreams, not just security to pay bills." He established a trust fund, $500,000, carefully invested, with specific instructions. Caleb would gain access at 30, when he'd be old enough to use it wisely but young enough to take risks. Henry made me promise, made me swear on everything we'd built together, that I'd protect that money until Caleb was ready. "This isn't just money, Claire," Henry said, gripping my hand with what little strength he had left. "This is his chance to build something meaningful. To help people the way he's always wanted to. Don't let anyone take that from him. Not even him, if he gets scared or doubtful. Make sure he uses it for good." I kept that promise for 13 years. Caleb threw himself into his studies after his father died. Architecture became his language for grief. He'd sketch buildings late into the night, designs for community centers and affordable housing complexes, structures meant to lift people up rather than simply contain them. He graduated from Portland State with honors, took a position at Morrison and Klein Architecture, and spent his weekends volunteering with Habitat for Humanity. "Dad would have loved this project," he told me once, showing me plans for a tiny home village for veterans. His eyes shone with the same intensity Henry's used to have. Dignified housing that costs a fraction of traditional construction. This is what architecture should be about. Then, 3 years ago, he met Vanessa. It was at a networking mixer for young professionals, one of those events Caleb normally avoided because he found small talk exhausting. But his boss had insisted, and that's where Vanessa approached him, confident and perfectly composed in a navy blazer that probably cost more than Caleb's entire wardrobe. She just walked up and started talking to me about sustainable design, Caleb told me the next day, his voice filled with wonder. She'd read about the tiny home project in the newspaper. She said she admired people who put purpose over profit. Their courtship was swift. Vanessa had a way of making things happen. Reservations at restaurants I'd never heard of, weekend trips to wine country, introductions to clients who might need architectural services. Within 6 months, they were engaged. Within a year, married in a beautiful ceremony at the Japanese garden that Vanessa orchestrated with military precision. I liked her at first. How could I not? She was articulate and organized, the kind of woman who remembered birthdays and sent thank you notes written in elegant script. She'd stop by for tea, ask about my book club, bring Henry's favorite sourdough bread from the bakery on Morrison Street. She called me Claire in that warm, familiar way that made me feel less like a mother-in-law and more like a friend. "You did such an incredible job raising him," she told me at their wedding reception, squeezing my hand. "Caleb talks about you constantly. About how you held everything together after Henry died, how you sacrificed so he could pursue his dreams. I promise you, I'll take care of him now. You can finally rest." It felt like a blessing, someone capable taking some of the weight I'd carried alone for so long. But then, small things began to shift. 2 months after the wedding, Vanessa suggested over Sunday dinner that she and Caleb should open a joint account. "It just makes financial sense," she said, cutting her salmon with precise movements. "We're building a life together. Separate finances create distance. Don't you think, Claire?" I hesitated. "I suppose it depends on the couple." "Mom still believes in financial independence," Caleb said, smiling at me. "She and Dad always kept some money separate." "Times were different then," Vanessa replied smoothly. "Modern couples operate as units. It's more efficient for tax purposes, for building credit together, for investments." She reached across the table and touched Caleb's hand. "I want us to be a real partnership. No secrets, no separation." Caleb nodded slowly. "That makes sense." The Sunday dinners began happening less frequently after that. Caleb would call to cancel, Vanessa had planned a work event, or they were meeting her colleagues, or he was tired and needed to catch up on rest. When we did see each other, I noticed he'd grown quieter about certain subjects. I asked once about his plans for the trust fund. His 30th birthday was approaching, and I knew Henry's dream was finally within reach. "Vanessa and I are still discussing the best approach," he said, not quite meeting my eyes. "She thinks we should wait until we've developed a comprehensive financial strategy." "But what do you think?" I pressed. "You've always known what you wanted to do." I know, Mom. But marriage means compromise. Vanessa understands investment strategies better than I do. She's just trying to help. The phrase, "she's just trying to help," became his refrain for everything. Why he couldn't make our weekly breakfasts anymore. Why he needed to decline my invitation to Patricia's birthday dinner. Why he seemed perpetually distracted when we did talk. "It's just newlywed adjustment," Patricia told me when I mentioned my concerns. "They're building their life together. You have to give him space." I tried to believe that. I wanted to believe that. Then, 3 months before he died, Caleb called me on a Tuesday evening, unusual because Vanessa didn't like interruptions during weeknights. His voice sounded different. Lighter. Almost giddy. "Mom, I just accessed the trust fund. It's real. Dad really did this for me." My heart swelled. "Of course it's real, sweetheart. Your father wanted you to chase your dreams." "I'm going to do it," he said, words tumbling out with an excitement I hadn't heard in months. "I'm going to open my own firm. Small at first, just me and maybe one partner. We'll focus exclusively on affordable housing, shelters, transitional living spaces, tiny home communities. I've already found a studio space downtown. Mom, I can feel Dad with me on this. Like he's finally seeing what I've become." That was the last time I heard my son truly happy. 6 weeks later, he was dead. The phone call came at 2:47 a.m. on a Thursday in October. I knew before I answered. No one calls at that hour with good news. My hand trembled as I reached for my cell phone on the nightstand, the blue glow illuminating Henry's side of the bed, still empty after all these years, but never as empty as it was about to feel. "Mrs. Dorsey?" A woman's voice, professional but strained. "This is Mercy Hospital. There's been an accident involving your son. You need to come immediately." The drive took 17 minutes. I remember every second, the empty streets slick with October rain, the traffic light at Morrison that seemed to stay red for an eternity, the way my hands gripped the steering wheel so hard my knuckles turned white. I kept thinking about the last thing Caleb had said to me, "Love you, Mom. Talk tomorrow." There wouldn't be a tomorrow. Vanessa was already in the emergency room waiting area when I arrived, her face streaked with mascara, a blanket wrapped around her shoulders. She looked up as I rushed through the automatic doors, and something about her expression stopped me cold. Her eyes were red and swollen, yes, but there was a composure beneath the tears, a stillness that didn't match the chaos of the moment. "Claire," she whispered, standing to embrace me. "Oh God, Claire. He's gone. Caleb's gone." The doctor appeared then, young and exhausted, his scrub still bearing traces of what I refused to let myself identify as my son's blood. He used words like blunt force trauma, and pronounced at the scene, and did everything we could, but all I heard was the roaring in my ears, the sound of my entire world collapsing into a single, endless moment of no. "What happened?" I managed to ask, my voice not sounding like my own. "Single vehicle accident on Highway 26, a police officer said, stepping forward with a notebook. Detective Morrison, his badge read. Your son's car went off the road near milepost 33, down a steep embankment. Heavy rain, poor visibility. Appears he lost control on a sharp curve. The vehicle rolled multiple times before coming to rest approximately 40 feet down the ravine. Caleb knew that road, I said. He drove it carefully. He always drove carefully. Rain makes even familiar roads dangerous, ma'am. Morrison's voice was kind but final. We see accidents on that stretch every year. Especially in fall when the leaves make the pavement slick. I'm very sorry for your loss. Vanessa sobbed into my shoulder, her body shaking. But when she pulled back, I noticed her hands weren't trembling. Her breathing, despite the tears, was measured and controlled. Can I see him? I asked. The doctor hesitated. Mrs. Dorsey, given the nature of the injuries, I'd advise against. He's my son. I need to see him. They led me to a room that was too cold and too quiet. Caleb lay on a gurney, covered with a white sheet pulled up to his chest. His face was mostly intact, a mercy I hadn't expected, but it wasn't the face I knew. Death had smoothed away the warmth, the kindness, the light that had always lived behind his eyes. This was just a shell. My son was already gone. I held his hand, still slightly warm, and whispered all the things mothers say when they've run out of time. I'm sorry. I love you. I should have protected you. Your father's waiting for you. Please forgive me. Vanessa stood in the doorway, watching. When I finally turned to leave, she was dabbing at her eyes with a tissue, but I could have sworn I saw something else in her expression. Relief? No. That couldn't be right. Grief makes you see things that aren't there. The days that followed blurred together like watercolors bleeding into one canvas of gray. I barely slept. When I did, I'd wake with a gasp, convinced I'd heard Caleb's voice calling from his old bedroom. The house felt cavernous and silent. No more evening phone calls, no more, just checking in, Mom, no more discussions about building codes and sustainable materials and how to make the world a little bit better. I'd find myself standing in his childhood room, holding his old t-shirts to my face, trying to catch the faint smell of his cologne, something woody and clean that Vanessa had bought him. I'd trace my fingers over the architectural sketches still tacked to his bulletin board from high school, buildings he'd never get to design, dreams he'd never get to fulfill. Patricia stayed with me those first few days, but even her presence couldn't fill the absence. She'd make tea I wouldn't drink, prepare food I couldn't eat, and sit beside me in silence because there were no words adequate for this kind of loss. Vanessa, meanwhile, transformed into a whirlwind of efficiency. I'll handle the arrangements, she told me the day after Caleb died, appearing at my door with a leather portfolio and a list. You shouldn't have to worry about any of this. Caleb would want you to focus on healing. The funeral she planned was elaborate, far more than anything Caleb would have wanted. A mahogany casket with gold fixtures. A service at the largest funeral home in Portland. Flowers everywhere, expensive arrangements of lilies and roses that filled the chapel with a cloying sweetness. A catered reception with food Caleb had never liked and music he'd never listened to. Don't you think this is a bit much? I asked her the night before the service. Caleb was always so humble. He would have wanted something simple. He deserves to be celebrated, Vanessa said firmly. He was an incredible man. This is the least we can do to honor him properly. She paid for everything. When I offered to contribute from the small savings I had left, she waved me away. You've sacrificed enough, Claire. Let me do this. Consider it my final gift to him. At the funeral, she delivered a eulogy that sounded like it had been written by a marketing team, generic platitudes about Caleb's passion for excellence and commitment to innovation. She never mentioned the tiny homes for veterans. She never mentioned his dream of building affordable housing. She never mentioned the trust fund that was supposed to make all of it possible. 2 weeks after we buried my son, Vanessa put their house on the market. I can't stay there, she explained when I called, shocked to see the for sale sign appear so suddenly. Every room reminds me of him. I need to start fresh, somewhere without all these memories. What about his things? His sketches, his books, his... I've already handled it, she said, her voice clipped. I kept a few personal items and donated the rest. The studio space downtown, I terminated the lease. He'd only had it for a month. It seemed wasteful to keep paying for empty space. But his work, his plans for the firm. Claire, those were dreams. They weren't real yet. I'm trying to move forward, and I think you should too. Clinging to what might have been will only make the grief worse. The house sold in 3 days, cash offer, no inspection. Vanessa moved to Arizona before the escrow even closed. She sent me a text from Scottsdale, starting over. Need distance to heal. Hope you understand. We'll stay in touch. She didn't. I tried calling a few times in those first months, but she never answered. Her social media, which I'd never paid much attention to before, suddenly became a gallery of her new life, poolside brunches, hiking trips to Sedona, weekend getaways to Santa Fe. She was smiling in every photo, her grief apparently cured by desert sunshine and expensive restaurants. Meanwhile, I sat in Caleb's childhood bedroom and cried until I had no tears left. Then, 3 months after the funeral, Richard Sutton called. "Mrs. Dorsey, I need to discuss Caleb's estate with you. There are some matters that require clarification." That's when I learned about the trust fund, how Caleb had liquidated it 6 months before his death, transferring everything to a joint account he shared with Vanessa. How, under Oregon law, the surviving account holder automatically inherits everything. How there was nothing left of Henry's dream, nothing left of the legacy he'd worked so hard to create. But Caleb was going to open his firm, I said, my voice hollow. He told me. He was excited about it. Perhaps he changed his mind, Sutton replied. Or perhaps Mrs. Dorsey convinced him to invest the funds differently. Either way, the transfers were legal. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Dorsey. I know this isn't what your late husband intended." After I hung up, I sat in my living room as afternoon light faded to dusk. Caleb's obituary lay on the coffee table. I'd read it so many times the newsprint had begun to smudge. Caleb Henry Dorsey, 34, architect and humanitarian, died in a tragic accident. He dreamed of building homes for those who had none. I picked up the paper, my hands finally steady for the first time in months, and whispered to the empty room. "You were supposed to build homes, not die in one." But even as I said it, something cold and sharp crystallized in my chest. A thought I'd been pushing away for weeks finally forced its way to the surface. What if it wasn't an accident? 6 months after I buried my son, Vanessa posted a photo of herself in front of a silver Mercedes GLE, keys dangling from her manicured fingers, caption reading, "New beginnings deserve new rides." Automobile sparkles. I stared at my phone screen in the dim light of my bedroom, my reading glasses slipping down my nose. The car probably cost $60,000. Maybe more. In the background of the photo, I could see part of her new house, modern, sprawling, all glass and desert stone with the Sonoran Mountains rising behind it. The comments section overflowed with congratulations. Friends I didn't recognize posting heart emojis and celebrating her fresh start. Someone wrote, "You deserve this after everything you've been through." Vanessa had replied with a prayer hands emoji and trying to honor his memory by living fully. My hand tightened around the phone until my knuckles went white. Patricia found me like that an hour later, still sitting in the dark, scrolling through months of Vanessa's curated happiness. Designer handbags. Wine tastings in Scottsdale. Spa weekends. Sunset photos with captions about healing and finding myself again. "You need to stop looking at those," Patricia said gently, sitting on the edge of my bed. "It's only hurting you." "She's spending his money," I whispered. Henry's money. The money that was supposed to help Caleb build something meaningful. Maybe Caleb wanted her to have it. Maybe that was his choice. He wouldn't have. I turned to face my sister, and something in my voice made her flinch. Caleb would never have liquidated that trust fund without telling me. He knew what it meant. He knew what his father wanted. Patricia squeezed my hand. "Claire, I know this is hard. But grief can make us see conspiracies where there are none. Vanessa lost her husband. Maybe the money helps her cope." After she left, I lay awake listening to the house settle around me. Everyone kept telling me the same thing: move on, let go, accept what happened. My book club friends said it. The grief counselor I'd seen twice before deciding she couldn't help me said it. Even the woman at the grocery store who'd known Caleb since he was a boy said it: "Time heals all wounds, dear. You'll see." But they were wrong. Time wasn't healing anything. It was only sharpening the questions that kept me awake at night. I developed a ritual in those dark months. Every evening after dinner, meals I barely touched, I'd sit in Caleb's old bedroom with my phone and scroll through our text message history. Months of conversations preserved like artifacts from another life. "Mom, can you send me Grandma's pot roast recipe? Vanessa wants to try making it." Just finished the rendering for the Veterans Housing Project. Wish Dad could see it. Love you. Don't work too hard correcting papers. Those kids are lucky to have you. I'd read them over and over, searching for hidden meanings, for warning signs I'd missed, for some clue that would explain the inexplicable. Sometimes I'd find myself texting back, forgetting for half a second that he'd never respond. Then I'd see the blue bubble of my own message sitting unanswered, and the grief would crash over me again, fresh and suffocating. But one conversation kept pulling me back. 3 weeks before he died, Caleb had sent me something that didn't quite fit with the others. Mom, if anything ever happens to me, don't trust what people tell you. Trust what you know about me. You're the only one who really knows who I am. I'd responded at the time, nothing's going to happen, sweetheart. But I always trust you. Love you. He'd replied with just a heart emoji. I dismissed it then as the philosophical musings of a young man feeling contemplative. But now, reading it in the context of everything that had followed, it felt different. It felt like a warning. The inconsistencies started to pile up once I began looking for them. I called Morrison & Klein, the architecture firm where Caleb had worked. His former boss, David Morrison, sounded genuinely sorrowful when I asked about the studio space Caleb had been planning to open. He was so excited about it, Morrison said. He showed me the lease agreement, told me he had the funding secured. But then he paused. Mrs. Dorsey, I probably shouldn't say this, but about 2 months before the accident, Caleb seemed different. Distracted. Worried about something. I asked if everything was okay at home, and he just said he was dealing with a financial situation. I assumed it was wedding debt or something normal like that. Did he ever mention the trust fund? I asked. Only once. He said he'd finally accessed it and was ready to start building his dream. That was maybe 6 weeks before he died. But Mrs. Dorsey, I checked with the commercial real estate agent he'd been working with. The studio lease was never finalized. The deposit was never paid. Whatever Caleb planned to do with that money, it never happened. After we hung up, I sat with that information, turning it over in my mind like a stone. Caleb had accessed the fund. He'd told me he was opening his firm. But the money never went where he'd intended. I started digging deeper. Vanessa had scrubbed Caleb from her social media, not just stopped posting about him, but deleted old photos. Their wedding pictures, gone. Photos of them at restaurants, on trips, celebrating holidays, all vanished as if their marriage had been erased. Her profile now showed only her new life, her fresh start, her expensive healing journey. I called the bank where Caleb had his accounts. They couldn't give me details. I wasn't listed as a beneficiary or account holder, but the customer service representative confirmed that all accounts under Caleb Henry Dorsey had been closed 4 months ago. Closed by whom? I asked. I'm sorry, ma'am, I can't disclose that information. But I knew. Vanessa had systematically eliminated every trace of my son from the financial world, transferred everything to her name, and moved to another state to spend it all. Patricia thought I was becoming obsessed. Maybe I was. But obsession was better than the alternative, accepting that my son had died for no reason, that Henry's legacy had been squandered, that everything Caleb had dreamed of building had died with him. Every night, I'd sit in my living room with a notebook, writing down everything that didn't make sense. Caleb excited about trust fund money never used for studio all transferred to Vanessa. Caleb careful driver accident on familiar road brake failure. Vanessa grief-stricken moved immediately living lavishly. Caleb's warning, don't trust what people tell you. The list grew longer. The questions multiplied. And still, everyone told me to let it go. Then, on a Tuesday evening in April, 7 months after I'd lost my son, I heard footsteps on my porch. I thought it was Patricia bringing dinner again, trying to make sure I was eating. But when I opened the door, no one was there. Just a cardboard box sitting on the welcome mat. No return address. No shipping label. Just my name written in black ink across the top in handwriting that made my breath catch in my throat. Careful, architectural lettering. Precise lines. The way Caleb had written his entire life, the way he'd labeled his sketches and blueprints. My hands shook as I carried the box inside, set it on the kitchen table, and stared at it for a full minute before finding the courage to open it. My heart hammered against my ribs. This wasn't possible. Caleb was dead. I'd seen his body. I'd watched them lower his casket into the ground. But that was his handwriting. I'd recognize it anywhere. I cut through the packing tape with trembling fingers and lifted the cardboard flaps. Inside was a leather-bound journal. Brown with gold-edged pages. The one I'd given him for his 30th birthday. The moment I saw that handwriting, my heart stopped. Caleb was gone, but his voice had found its way back to me. I lifted the journal from the box with both hands, as if it were something sacred. The leather was worn at the corners where Caleb had carried it in his messenger bag, the spine creased from being opened and closed hundreds of times. A ribbon bookmark still marked a page somewhere in the middle. For a long moment, I just held it against my chest, feeling the weight of it, trying to understand how it had found its way to my doorstep. Who had sent it? Why now, 7 months after his death? Then I sat down at the kitchen table, turned on the overhead light, and opened to the first page. January 15th, first day with the journal Mom gave me for my 30th birthday. She wrote inside, "For all your dreams, written and built. Love, Mom. Going to use this to document the firm. Every decision, every project, every step toward making Dad's dream real." My vision blurred. I had to set the journal down and wipe my eyes before I could continue. The early entries were exactly what I'd expected: mundane observations, work notes, project ideas. Sketches of buildings filled the margins, his clean architectural drawings showing floor plans and elevation views. He wrote about meetings with potential investors, about the veterans' housing project he wanted to make his firm's first major undertaking, about color palettes and sustainable materials. March 3rd, accessed the trust fund today. $500,000. I sat in the bank and just stared at the balance. Dad saved this for me. Worked overtime, skipped vacations, lived modestly so I could have this chance. I won't waste it. I'm going to build something that matters. I turned pages slowly, watching my son's excitement build through his words. He described finding the studio space, negotiating the lease, drawing up business plans. Every entry radiated hope and purpose. Then, about 40 pages in, the tone shifted. April 12th, something strange happened today. I checked our joint account to transfer money for the studio deposit, and there was $15,000 missing. When I asked Vanessa about it, she said she'd moved it to a high-yield investment account she set up for us. But when I asked for the account details, she got defensive. Said I needed to trust her financial expertise. That she was trying to grow our wealth, not just spend it. Maybe she's right. Maybe I'm being paranoid. My stomach tightened. I turned to the next entry. April 19th, another withdrawal. $30,000 this time. Vanessa says it's going into real estate investments. Properties we're buying together under an LLC she created. Building our portfolio, she calls it. But when I asked to see the paperwork, she said it wasn't finalized yet. That I'd just confuse myself with legal documents I don't understand. She laughed when she said it, like it was a joke. But it didn't feel like a joke. I kept reading, my hands beginning to shake. May 2nd, I went to the county records office today during lunch. Searched for any properties registered to Vanessa Dorsey or the LLC she mentioned, Apex Holdings Group. Nothing. I searched variations of the name. Still nothing. The clerk was helpful, ran multiple searches. No real estate purchases, no pending transactions, no LLC registration. Where is the money going? The entries became darker, more frequent, more desperate. May 8th, confronted Vanessa tonight about the properties. She got angry, said I was questioning her integrity. That after everything she's done to help me, I repay her with accusations? She cried. Made me feel like I was the one in the wrong. But Mom, something's not right. I can feel it. May 15th, she's been getting phone calls late at night. I heard her in the bathroom at 2 a.m., whispering. When I asked who called so late, she said it was a client on the East Coast with a time-sensitive investment opportunity. But I heard her say, he doesn't suspect anything yet. Who was she talking about? Me? My breath came in short gasps. I forced myself to keep reading. May 23rd, check the trust fund account. It's almost empty. $480,000 gone in 6 weeks. All transferred to the joint account, then moved somewhere I can't track. When I told Vanessa I was going to freeze the remaining funds until we sorted this out, her face changed. Just for a second, but I saw it. Something cold and calculating. She said, "You do that, and you'll regret it." Not like a wife giving advice. Like a threat. The next entry made my blood run cold. May 29th, I've been recording her phone calls. I know that sounds crazy, like I've become paranoid and suspicious, but Mom, I needed proof. Last night I recorded a conversation she had with someone named Eli. I've never heard her mention anyone by that name. She was standing in the garage, thought I was asleep. I'll transcribe what I heard. Vanessa, once the money clears, he won't be a problem. Eli, you're sure you can handle it? Vanessa, I've been handling it for months. He trusts me completely. We'll stage it carefully. No one questions a car accident in the rain. Eli, and the timeline? Vanessa, 2 weeks. Maybe 3. Once the final transfer goes through and everything's clean. Then we disappear. You get your cut, I get my freedom. Mom, I listened to this recording 20 times. I'm not misunderstanding. I'm not imagining it. She's planning something. Something bad. I think she's going to. The entry ended there, the sentence unfinished, as if he'd been interrupted. I was shaking so violently I could barely turn the page. Tears streamed down my face, dripping onto the journal, smudging his careful handwriting. The next entry was dated 2 days later. May 31st, I've copied everything to a flash drive. Bank statements, recordings, emails I found on her laptop. There's another man involved, this Eli person, and they've been planning this for at least 3 months. Maybe longer. I found encrypted messages going back to before we got married. Mom, I think she married me for the trust fund. I think this was always her plan. I'm going to the police tomorrow. I have enough evidence. But I'm scared. What if I'm wrong? What if there's an explanation I'm not seeing? What if I destroy my marriage over paranoia? No. I'm not wrong. The numbers don't lie. The recordings don't lie. Then came the final entry. My hands trembled so badly I could barely read the words. June 3rd, if you're reading this, Mom, I was right about her. Something's happened to me, and she made it happen. The proof is in my studio, in the desk drawer, taped underneath. Flash drive labeled Insurance. I'm leaving this journal with David Morrison at the firm. I told him if anything happens to me, to send it to you. I'm sorry I didn't tell you sooner. I kept thinking I could handle it, that I could fix this, that maybe I was being crazy. But I'm not crazy. And I'm running out of time. The recording is the key. Once you hear her voice planning this, planning whatever she's going to do to me, you'll understand. Don't let her get away with this. Don't let her spend Dad's money and pretend to grieve while she's really celebrating. She's not who we thought she was. She's never been who we thought she was. I love you, Mom. I'm sorry I brought her into our family. I'm sorry I didn't see the truth sooner. If I'm gone, it's because I trusted the wrong person. But you can make it right. You're the strongest person I know. You held our family together after Dad died. Now I need you to fight for me. Don't stop until you find the truth. Promise me. I love you. Always. Caleb. The journal slipped from my hands and fell to the table. I sat in my kitchen, surrounded by the ordinary things of my ordinary life. The coffee maker, the dish towel hanging on the oven, the calendar still showing April even though it was now May, and I wept. Not the helpless tears of grief I'd cried for 7 months. These were different. Harder. Angrier. My son had known. He'd known he was in danger, and he'd tried to leave me a trail of breadcrumbs. He'd gathered evidence, recorded conversations, documented everything. And then they'd killed him and made it look like an accident. I stood up, my legs unsteady, and wiped my face with the back of my hand. The studio. The flash drive. That's where the proof was. That's what Caleb had left for me. For the first time in months, my grief had a direction. I grabbed my car keys and my purse. It was 9:30 at night, dark outside, starting to rain. But I didn't care. My son had asked me to fight for him. And that's exactly what I was going to do. The studio was in a converted warehouse district downtown, 3rd floor of a brick building that still smelled faintly of the coffee roaster that had occupied the ground level for decades. I hadn't been here since Caleb showed it to me 3 weeks before he died, his face glowing with excitement as he'd pointed out where his drafting table would go, where he'd hang inspiration boards, where clients would sit and dream with him about buildings that could change lives. Now the hallway leading to Unit 304 was dark and silent. My footsteps echoed on the concrete floor. The building manager had looked at me strangely when I'd called, asking if the space was still vacant, if I could access it one last time to retrieve my son's belongings. "It's been 7 months, Mrs. Dorsey," he'd said gently. "The lease was terminated. But I suppose, for closure. I'll leave it unlocked for you." I pushed open the door and fumbled for the light switch. Fluorescent tubes flickered to life, revealing a space frozen in time. Dust coated every surface, thick and undisturbed. A coffee mug still sat on the windowsill, the dried remnants of whatever Caleb had been drinking forming a dark ring at the bottom. His favorite pencil cup, the one I'd given him when he graduated college, ceramic with "Build Your Dreams" printed on the side, stood on the metal desk in the corner, still holding his mechanical pencils and red marking pens. Blueprint tubes leaned against the wall. I recognized the veterans' housing project he'd been working on, the label written in his precise handwriting. Papers scattered across the desk showed calculations, material estimates, sketches of floor plans. Everything was exactly as he'd left it, as if he'd just stepped out for lunch and would return any moment. My throat tightened. I could feel him here. His presence lingered in this space, in the way he'd arranged the desk to catch natural light, in the inspiration photos he'd taped to the wall showing innovative affordable housing projects from around the world, in the small succulent plant on the shelf that had long since died from lack of water. I approached the desk slowly, my heart pounding. The drawer. Caleb had said underneath the drawer. I pulled it open, pens, sticky notes, business cards, the ordinary detritus of an architect's work life. Then I knelt down, reached into the cavity, and felt along the underside of the drawer. My fingers touched something. Tape. And beneath it, something small and rectangular. I pulled. The tape resisted, then gave way with a soft tearing sound. In my hand was a small black flash drive, no bigger than my thumb, with a white label that read in Caleb's handwriting, "Insurance." I sat back on my heels, clutching it so tightly the edges bit into my palm. This was it. The proof my son had died to preserve. I drove home faster than I should have, the flash drive in my pocket burning like a coal against my thigh. Patricia's car was in my driveway, she'd probably brought dinner again, but I didn't want company. Not for this. I texted her that I wasn't feeling well, that I'd call tomorrow, and waited in my car until she left, her face concerned as she peered at my dark house before finally driving away. Inside, I went straight to my laptop, sat at the kitchen table under the bright overhead light, and plugged in the drive. The folder that opened contained 37 files. Bank statements. Email screenshots. Photos of documents. And 6 audio files, each labeled with a date. I started with the bank statements. They showed the trust fund being systematically drained, transfers ranging from $10,000 to $50,000, always to the joint account Caleb shared with Vanessa, then immediately moved again to accounts I didn't recognize. Account numbers in the Cayman Islands. Wire transfers to shell companies with names like Meridian Holdings LLC and Pacific Asset Trust. The emails made my stomach turn. Messages between Vanessa and someone named Eli Parks, discussing the target, liquidation timelines, and exit strategies. One email from 6 months before Caleb's death read: Target has accessed primary asset. Timeline accelerated. Estimate 8 to 10 weeks for full extraction. Will maintain trust level. Suggest staging for late May/early June. Weather patterns favorable. They were discussing my son like he was a business transaction. A mark. Something to be exploited and discarded. I opened the first audio file with trembling fingers. Vanessa's voice filled my kitchen, crystal clear, talking to a man whose voice was deeper, rougher. He's starting to ask questions about the properties, Vanessa said. I told him the paperwork wasn't ready yet, but he's not stupid. He's going to check eventually. Then we move faster, Eli replied. How much is left? About $20,000 in the trust account. Everything else is already offshore. We can be done in 2 weeks. And him? A pause. Long enough that I held my breath. I've been researching Highway 26, Vanessa said, her voice cold and businesslike. There's a curve at milepost 33. Sharp drop-off, no guardrail. In the rain, if a car's brake lines were compromised. Jesus, Vanessa. What? You want your cut or not? We agreed, no loose ends. Once the transfer goes through, it'll look natural. An accident. Tragic, but natural. And you can live with that? Vanessa laughed. Actually laughed. I can live very well with $500,000, Eli. That's the point. I stopped the recording, my whole body shaking. I played it again. And again. And again. Each time, Vanessa's words grew sharper, more real, more damning. No loose ends. It'll look natural. I can live very well with $500,000. My grief was transforming into something harder, something I'd never felt before. Rage. Pure, crystalline rage that made my vision sharp and my thoughts clear. The next morning, I took the flash drive to the Portland Police Department. Detective Morrison, the same one who told me about the accident, listened politely as I explained what I'd found. Mrs. Dorsey, he said, his expression sympathetic but firm, I understand you're struggling with your son's death. It's natural to want answers, to want someone to blame. Listen to the recording, I interrupted, pushing the flash drive across his desk. Just listen. He did. I watched his face as Vanessa's voice described sabotaging Caleb's brakes, as she laughed about living well on stolen money. When it ended, Morrison removed his headphones and looked at me with something that wasn't quite pity but wasn't belief either. Audio files can be doctored, he said carefully. Voices can be synthesized, conversations can be fabricated. Without corroborating evidence. The bank statements are right there. The emails. The show financial irregularities, yes. But nothing that proves murder. Your son liquidated his trust fund and put the money in a joint account with his wife. That's not illegal. After his death, she inherited it. Also not illegal. As for the recording. He slid the flash drive back toward me. Any decent defense attorney would tear it apart. I'm sorry, Mrs. Dorsey. I truly am. But what you have here isn't enough to reopen the case. My son recorded his wife planning to kill him, and that's not enough? Your son recorded something. We can't verify when, or even if that's really Mrs. Dorsey's voice. I'm not saying you're lying. I'm saying this wouldn't hold up in court. I took the flash drive, my hands steady despite the fury coursing through me. So that's it? She gets away with murdering my son for money? I'm saying you need more evidence. Real, physical evidence. The kind that can't be questioned. Morrison's expression softened. Mrs. Dorsey, I've been doing this job for 20 years. I've seen a lot of grieving parents convinced there's more to their child's death. Sometimes they're right. But sometimes grief makes us see patterns that aren't there. I'm not saying which this is. I'm just saying you need something concrete before we can act. Outside the police station, I sat in my car and stared at the flash drive in my hand. The proof of my son's murder, dismissed as potentially fake. The recordings of his killer planning his death, waved away as insufficient. Patricia would tell me to accept it, to let the authorities handle it, to trust the system. But the system had failed my son. It had ruled his murder an accident. It had let his killer walk free with his money and his dignity. If they won't fight for my son, I thought, gripping the steering wheel until my knuckles went white, then I will. I started the car and pulled out my phone. I needed help. The kind of help the police couldn't, or wouldn't, provide. I needed someone who specialized in finding the truth that others wanted buried. I needed a private investigator. Alan Grant's office was above a bail bondsman's shop on the east side, the kind of place I'd never have entered in my previous life as a high school English teacher. But I wasn't that person anymore. That person had believed the world was fundamentally fair, that justice was inevitable, that good people were protected by some cosmic order. That person had been a fool. Grant looked exactly like what I needed, mid-50s, with silver-threaded hair cut military short and eyes that had seen too much to be shocked by anything. His handshake was firm, his office sparse but organized, and when I played him Vanessa's recording, his expression never changed. He just listened, made notes, and nodded. Ex-FBI, he said when I asked about his background. 22 years with the Bureau, Financial Crimes Division. Retired 3 years ago because I got tired of watching rich people buy their way out of consequences. He tapped the flash drive. This is good. Better than good. But the detective was right about one thing, we need corroboration. Lucky for you, that's what I do. How much? I asked, thinking of my modest teacher's pension, the savings that had dwindled over the months of grief. My usual rate is $200 an hour, plus expenses. He must have seen something in my face because he held up a hand. But I'll make you a deal, Mrs. Dorsey. If your daughter-in-law really did murder your son for money, then she's sitting on $500,000 that should be yours. You pay me $5,000 now to get started. When we recover the funds, and we will recover them, you pay me 20% of whatever we get back. Sound fair? It sounded like hope. I wrote the check. Grant worked fast. Within a week, he'd traced Elijah Parks through databases I didn't know existed. Parks had a record: fraud, identity theft, conspiracy to commit wire fraud. He'd been part of 3 separate scams over the past decade, each time targeting wealthy or recently wealthy individuals, each time disappearing before authorities could build a case. Your boy wasn't his first victim, Grant told me during our second meeting, spreading photos across his desk. But he might be the first one Parks actually killed. The others, he just ruined financially and moved on. This time, he partnered with someone more ambitious. Vanessa. Vanessa Hayes, before she married your son. And before that, Vanessa Cortez. And before that, Vanessa Mitchell. Grant slid a printout toward me. She's changed her name 3 times in the past 12 years. Each time, she was involved with a man who had significant assets. Each time, those assets mysteriously evaporated. Each time, she moved to a new state and started over. My hands clenched into fists. How is she not in prison? Because she's smart. She stays just this side of prosecutable, always has a paper trail showing the victim authorized the transfers, always leaves before anyone gets suspicious enough to investigate deeply. He leaned forward. But this time, she got greedy. This time, she killed someone. And murder? Murder we can prove. Grant hired a forensic accountant who traced the trust fund money through 4 shell companies, 2 offshore accounts, and eventually to a Scottsdale investment account in Vanessa's name. He found the forged power of attorney documents, Caleb's signature expertly copied but not quite perfect under microscopic analysis. He tracked down the mechanic in a small town outside Portland who'd been paid $5,000 cash to look the other way when someone came to do maintenance on Caleb's car the night before the accident. The mechanic, a man named Dennis Cooper with a gambling problem and a conscience that apparently had a price, broke down when Grant confronted him. "I didn't know what they were gonna do," Cooper said, his statement recorded and notarized. The woman said her husband was cheating, that she just wanted to track his movements. "She paid me to let her friend access the car. I saw him mess with something under the chassis, but I didn't ask. I swear to God, I didn't know they were gonna kill him." Grant took the car's VIN number and tracked down the vehicle's final location, a salvage yard south of Salem. The wreckage had been crushed for scrap 2 months after the accident, but the yard kept photographic records of every vehicle before processing. The photos showed brake lines that had been cleanly cut, then partially reattached to fail under pressure. "Not an accident," Grant said, pointing to the images. "Sabotage. Premeditated murder." For weeks after I'd hired him, Grant walked into the FBI field office in Portland with 3 bankers' boxes of evidence. Financial records. Forged documents. Audio recordings. Witness statements. Photos of the sabotaged brake lines. A complete timeline of Vanessa and Eli's conspiracy. The federal prosecutor who took the case was a woman named Jennifer Steele, young and sharp-eyed, who looked at me across her desk and said something I'll never forget. "Mrs. Dorsey, what happened to your son was evil. But evil leaves tracks. And thanks to you, we can follow them straight to the people responsible." What happened next felt like watching a movie, like observing events that couldn't possibly be real. The FBI raided Vanessa's Scottsdale home at 6:47 a.m. on a Tuesday. Grant called me as it happened, describing the scene as his contacts fed him information in real time. 12 agents, 3 vehicles, a search warrant that covered every electronic device and financial document in the house. They found Vanessa poolside in a silk robe, drinking coffee, living the life she'd built on my son's grave. She tried to act shocked, Grant told me. Kept saying there must be some mistake, that her husband's death was ruled an accident, that she didn't understand what they were talking about. But when they mentioned Eli Parks, her face went white. Eli was arrested the same day in Tampa, trying to board a plane to Costa Rica with 3 fake passports and $80,000 cash. He'd been living under the name Marcus Brennan, running another scam on another victim, already planning his next murder. The news coverage was extensive. "Widow arrested in murder-for-hire plot," the headlines read. "Black widow killer stole trust fund, staged husband's death." My phone rang constantly, reporters, old colleagues, people I hadn't spoken to in years, all wanting to know how I'd known, how I'd proven it, how I'd brought justice for my son. But I felt nothing like victory. Patricia found me in Caleb's bedroom the night of the arrests, sitting on his old bed, holding the leather journal in my lap. "They got her," Patricia said softly. "Claire, they arrested her. It's over." "Is it?" I looked up at my sister. "Caleb's still dead. Henry's trust fund, the one he worked his entire life to build, was still stolen and spent on spa days and designer purses. My son died terrified, knowing his wife was going to kill him, leaving me clues because he knew I was the only one who'd fight for him. But you did fight for him. And you won." I shook my head. "I didn't win, Tricia. I just made sure his killer didn't get away with it." "That's not the same thing." The evidence against Vanessa and Eli was overwhelming. The forged power of attorney. The offshore accounts. The recording of them planning the murder. Dennis Cooper's testimony about the brake line sabotage. The pattern of Vanessa's previous cons. The fake passports Eli was caught with. The federal prosecutor called it one of the most clear-cut cases she'd ever seen. But clarity didn't ease the pain. The night before Vanessa's arraignment, I sat in my living room with a glass of wine I didn't drink and thought about everything that had been lost. Not just Caleb, though God knows that loss was everything, but the innocence I'd had before. The belief that monsters looked like monsters, that evil announced itself clearly, that the people we loved couldn't hide such darkness behind familiar faces. I didn't know whether to cry or scream. I'd wanted the truth, but truth came covered in blood. My son's blood. Spilled for money by a woman who'd smiled at our wedding, who'd called me mom, who'd held my hand at Henry's grave and promised to take care of Caleb. Grant called at midnight. "Mrs. Dorsey? Wanted you to know before you see it on the news." Eli flipped. Gave a full confession in exchange for a reduced sentence. He's testifying against Vanessa, detailing the entire conspiracy. She's looking at life without parole. "Good," I said, though the word tasted like ash. "It is good, Claire. Your son can rest now." But as I hung up the phone and looked at Caleb's photo on the mantel, his smile bright and genuine, taken at his architecture school graduation, I wondered if that was true. Could the dead rest when justice came too late to save them? Could I? The courtroom was smaller than I'd expected, but it felt cavernous. Every sound echoed, the shuffle of feet, the rustle of papers, the quiet conversations between attorneys that stopped the moment the bailiff called us to order. I sat in the front row, directly behind the prosecution table, with Patricia on my left and Alan Grant on my right. Across the aisle, Vanessa sat between her lawyers, wearing a conservative gray suit that probably came from her public defender's advice. Her hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail. No makeup. No jewelry. She looked smaller than I remembered, diminished somehow, as if the weight of her crimes had physically compressed her. She didn't look at me. Not once during the entire proceeding. The trial lasted 3 weeks, but it felt like 3 years. Every day, I sat in that same seat and listened to the systematic destruction of the woman who'd destroyed my son. The forensic accountant testified about the money trail. Dennis Cooper described how he'd been paid to let someone access Caleb's car. FBI agents presented the forged documents, the offshore accounts, the pattern of fraud that stretched back over a decade. And then Eli took the stand. He looked different from his photos, thinner, older, defeated. He wore an orange jumpsuit and kept his eyes down as the prosecutor walked him through his testimony. His voice was flat, mechanical, like he was reading someone else's story. "How did you meet Vanessa Hayes?" Jennifer Steele asked. "Online. A forum for people interested in financial trading. She reached out, said she had a business opportunity. A mark with a large trust fund, newly married, trusting. She said she needed a partner. And what was the plan? She'd marry him, get access to the money, move it offshore through shell companies I'd set up. We'd split it 60-40, her favor. Clean exit, no suspicion." When did murder become part of the plan? Eli finally looked up, and I saw something in his face, not remorse exactly, but acknowledgement. When Caleb started asking questions. Vanessa said he was getting suspicious, checking records, tracking accounts. She said we needed to accelerate the timeline and eliminate the problem. By eliminate the problem, you mean murder Caleb Dorsey? Yes. And whose idea was that? Hers. Vanessa's. She researched the location, planned the timing, found the mechanic. I argued against it at first, said it was too risky, but she said it was the only way. That he'd go to the police if we didn't act fast. The prosecutor played the recording then, Vanessa's voice filling the courtroom, cold and calculating as she discussed brake lines and weather patterns and how no one questions a car accident in the rain. I watched the jury's faces as they listened. Watched shock turn to disgust turn to anger. When the recording ended, Steele asked, "Is that Vanessa Hayes' voice?" "Yes." "And were you present when this conversation took place?" "I was on the other end of the phone, yes." "Did you believe she was serious about killing her husband?" "Yes." "And she did it." 2 weeks later, exactly like she planned. Vanessa's attorney tried to argue that Eli was lying to reduce his own sentence, that he was the mastermind and Vanessa the victim. But when Vanessa took the stand in her own defense, everything fell apart. She wept. Sobbed, actually, dabbing at her eyes with tissues while her lawyer asked gentle questions about her marriage, about Caleb's dream of opening a firm, about how much she'd loved him. "I never meant for any of this to happen," she said, her voice breaking. "I made mistakes, terrible mistakes, but I never wanted Caleb to die. You have to believe me." Jennifer Steele stood for cross-examination, and the temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. "Mrs. Hayes, you testified that you loved your husband. Is that correct?" "Yes." "And yet you stole $500,000 from him." "It was our money. Joint account." "You forged power of attorney documents to access funds he hadn't authorized you to touch. Correct?" Vanessa's lawyer objected, but the judge overruled. "I was trying to invest it for us," Vanessa said weakly. "In shell companies that didn't exist? In offshore accounts registered only in your name?" Steele's voice was sharp as a scalpel. "Mrs. Hayes, we have recordings of you planning your husband's murder. We have testimony from your accomplice. We have forensic evidence of brake-line sabotage. We have financial records showing you systematically looted his trust fund. And you sit here, crying, claiming you never meant for him to die?" "I panicked. I made mistakes. You murdered him." Steele moved closer to the witness stand. "You married Caleb Dorsey specifically to steal his inheritance. You planned his death down to the exact location and method. You collected the insurance money and life insurance payout, moved to another state, and spent his money on luxury items while his mother grieved. Those aren't mistakes, Mrs. Hayes. That's premeditated murder for financial gain. I never wanted. You don't get to cry over the man you killed for his money." Steele's words cut through Vanessa's sobs like a blade. "You don't get to play the victim when you're the monster who destroyed a family for $500,000. The courtroom was silent except for Vanessa's weeping. The jury deliberated for 4 hours. Guilty on all counts: first-degree murder, wire fraud, forgery, conspiracy to commit murder. When the verdicts were read, Vanessa's legs gave out. Her attorneys had to hold her upright as the judge set a sentencing date. 2 weeks later, I sat in that same courtroom and watched Vanessa receive life in prison without the possibility of parole. Eli, in exchange for his testimony, received 25 years. The judge looked directly at Vanessa before pronouncing sentence. "You took a kind, talented young man who wanted to help others and ended his life for profit. You betrayed the sacred trust of marriage in the most heinous way possible. The court finds no mitigating factors, no reason for mercy. You will spend the rest of your life considering what you've done." Vanessa was led away in handcuffs. This time, as they walked her past our row, she looked at me. Our eyes met for perhaps 3 seconds. I don't know what she expected to see: triumph, maybe, or satisfaction. What she saw was grief. Still, always, grief that would never fully heal. But also resolve. The federal government recovered $437,000 of the trust fund through asset forfeiture and restitution orders. The rest had been spent, dissipated on Vanessa's lavish lifestyle, unrecoverable. But $437,000 was enough. More than enough. 6 months after Vanessa's sentencing, I stood in front of a small office downtown, the same building where Caleb's studio had been, and unveiled a bronze plaque. The Caleb Dorsey Foundation for Youth Architecture, Building Dreams, Creating Hope. The foundation would provide scholarships for architecture students interested in affordable housing design. It would fund internships with firms focused on social impact. It would award grants for projects that served low-income communities, exactly the work Caleb had dreamed of doing. Henry's money, filtered through tragedy and bloodshed, would finally serve its intended purpose. The local newspaper ran a story: "Mother fulfills slain son's vision through foundation." Reporters interviewed me about Caleb's dreams, his values, his belief that architecture could change lives. They asked how it felt to transform tragedy into purpose. "It doesn't fix what was broken," I told them. My son is still gone. But his dream isn't. As long as this foundation exists, Caleb is still building. Still helping people. Still making the world better. At the foundation's opening reception, Patricia raised a glass of champagne and smiled through tears. Henry would be proud. Caleb would be proud. They'd be here, I corrected gently. But yes. They'd be proud. That night, alone in my house, I sat in Caleb's old bedroom with his journal in my lap. I turned to the last entry, the one where he'd written about leaving proof, about trusting me to fight for him. I took a pen and wrote beneath his words. I fought for you, sweetheart. Justice is served. Your dream lives on. Rest now. Mom loves you. Always. I closed the journal and placed it on the shelf next to Henry's photo and Caleb's architecture degree. 3 generations of Dorsey dreams, preserved in paper and memory, and the foundation that would carry my son's name forward into a future he'd never see. It wasn't enough. It would never be enough. But it was something. And for now, something would have to be enough. 2 years after Vanessa's conviction, I woke to sunlight streaming through my bedroom window and the sound of birds in the maple tree Caleb and Henry had planted. For the first time in what felt like a lifetime, I didn't wake with the weight of grief crushing my chest. The pain was still there, it would always be there, but it had transformed into something else. Something I could carry without being destroyed by it. Life had found a rhythm again. Not the old rhythm from before tragedy struck, but a new one, quieter and more purposeful. I'd returned to substitute teaching part-time, mostly because I missed the students and the feeling of shaping young minds. Patricia and I had our weekly dinners. My book club had resumed meeting at my house on Thursday evenings. And every day, the foundation grew. The Caleb Dorsey Foundation had awarded scholarships to 18 students in its first 2 years. Bright young architects who shared my son's vision of using design to serve humanity rather than just aesthetics or profit. I'd met each one personally, sat with them in the office that had once been Caleb's intended studio, and told them about the man whose dream they were carrying forward. Your son must have been remarkable, one scholarship recipient, a young woman named Maria who wanted to design transitional housing for domestic violence survivors, told me at our last meeting. He was, I'd replied. But more than that, he believed architecture was a form of love. That every building you design is a statement about how much you value the people who live inside it. Maria had gotten tears in her eyes. I'll remember that. I promise. That's what the foundation had become, not just money for education, but a living repository of Caleb's values, his beliefs, his voice speaking to a new generation of builders who would never meet him but would carry his vision into the future. Sunday mornings were sacred to me now. I'd wake early, make coffee in Henry's old ceramic pot, and drive to Riverside Cemetery where both my husband and son rested side by side under the oak tree on the eastern slope. I always brought the same things, fresh flowers, usually sunflowers because they'd been Caleb's favorite, a thermos of coffee, and his leather-bound journal. This particular Sunday was bright and cool, early autumn painting the leaves gold and crimson. I settled into the portable chair I kept in my car trunk and arranged everything on the blanket I'd spread over the grass. Good morning, my loves, I said, touching first Henry's headstone, then Caleb's. Henry's was simple, Henry James Dorsey, beloved husband and father, 1955 to 2009. Caleb said more, Caleb Henry Dorsey, architect of dreams, builder of hope, 1989 to 2023. Truth always finds a way. I'd chosen those last words from his journal. They felt right. They felt like him. I opened the journal to a page I'd marked, an entry from when Caleb was 25, still in graduate school, writing about his vision for what architecture could be. Listen to this, I said, as if they could hear me. Maybe they could. I chose to believe they could. He wrote, today in studio, Professor Chen asked us what legacy we wanted to leave. Everyone talked about signature buildings, about fame, about making their mark. But I kept thinking about Dad, about how his legacy wasn't anything he built with his hands. It was the way he loved us. The way he sacrificed so I could have opportunities he never had. That's the kind of legacy I want, not buildings that bear my name, but lives that are better because of what I designed. Homes that give people dignity. Spaces that tell them they matter. Mom says love is action, not just feeling. I think architecture can be love made visible. My voice caught. Even after 2 years, even with the foundation thriving and justice served, reading his words still broke something open inside me. You succeeded, sweetheart, I whispered. You didn't get to build those homes yourself, but 18 young architects are building them now. They're designing shelters and transitional housing in affordable communities, and every single one of them knows your name. Knows your story. Knows that architecture can be love made visible. I poured coffee from the thermos, took a sip, and watched clouds drift across the autumn sky. Vanessa's appeals were denied, I said after a moment. All of them. She'll die in prison, exactly like the judge said. Eli's already served 2 years of his 25. Alan Grant says he's become a model prisoner, teaching other inmates about financial literacy. Ironic, isn't it? The man who helped steal your life is now helping others avoid the mistakes he made. I didn't know how to feel about that. Part of me wanted Eli to suffer every day of his sentence. But another part, the part that still believed in redemption, that still taught Shakespeare and believed in the possibility of human transformation, thought maybe that was its own form of justice. The first Caleb Dorsey scholar graduated last month, I continued. Marcus Chen, yes, Professor Chen's nephew, small world, designed a community center for houseless youth in Seattle. He invited me to the opening. Said he wanted me to see what your legacy looked like in real life. I smiled through tears. It was beautiful, Caleb. Everything you would have designed. Dignified spaces with natural light and green areas and places for people to feel human again. Marcus gave a speech and thanked the foundation. Thanked you, said you taught him that buildings are conversations between architects and humanity. A breeze moved through the oak tree, rustling the leaves. I like to imagine it was Caleb's way of responding, of letting me know he heard. I'm okay now, I said softly. Most days, anyway. I think about you constantly, but it doesn't destroy me anymore. Patricia says I found peace, and maybe she's right. Not the peace of forgetting or moving on, I'll never move on from you, but the peace of knowing that your death wasn't meaningless. That the truth you died protecting came to light. That the woman who killed you will never hurt anyone else. That your dream is alive and growing. I closed the journal and pressed it against my heart. Your father would be so proud of you. Not just for what you tried to do, but for how you did it, with integrity, with love, with hope even when you knew you were in danger. You could have run. You could have just frozen the accounts and left Vanessa. But you stayed to gather evidence because you knew someone had to stop her. You protected me even knowing it might cost you everything. The sun climbed higher. Other families began arriving with their own flowers, their own grief, their own rituals of remembrance. I stood, folded my chair, and kissed my fingers before pressing them to both headstones. My son built homes in his dreams, I whispered. But he built justice in his death. And through that, he'll never stop building. As I walked back to my car, I thought about how truth works. How it can be buried but never destroyed. How it waits patiently in journals and flash drives and recorded phone calls until someone who loves enough to fight comes looking for it. Caleb's truth had outlived Vanessa's deception. My love for him had transformed into justice. And now, through the foundation, his voice was speaking to young architects who would carry his vision forward for decades to come. Some voices, I'd learned, never go silent. They just wait for the right people to hear them and amplify them until they become louder than the lies that tried to drown them out. I drove home through streets dappled with autumn light, past the high school where I'd taught for 35 years, past the bookstore where Henry and I had met, past the coffee shop where Caleb and I had shared countless Sunday breakfasts. The city was full of ghosts, but they were gentle ghosts now. Memories that blessed rather than haunted. At home, I made lunch and sat at my kitchen table with my laptop, answering emails from foundation applicants. A young man in Ohio who wanted to design tiny home villages for veterans. A woman in Texas developing low-cost housing using sustainable materials. A team of students in California proposing a modular shelter system for wildfire evacuees. Caleb's dream, multiplying and evolving, touching lives he'd never meet in places he'd never see. Before bed, I wrote in my own journal, a habit I developed since reading his. I wrote about Marcus's community center, about the scholarship applications I'd reviewed, about the way sunlight had filtered through the oak tree at the cemetery. And then I wrote directly to Caleb, the way I did every night. Your voice still speaks, sweetheart. Through the foundation, through the scholars, through every building they design with love and dignity. Vanessa tried to silence you, but she failed. Truth always finds a way. You taught me that. I'll spend the rest of my life making sure your words keep echoing. Sleep well. Mom loves you. Always. I closed the journal and turned off the light. In the darkness, I could almost hear his voice from all those evening phone calls. Love you too, Mom. Talk tomorrow. There would be no tomorrow for us in this life. But through the foundation, through the students carrying his vision, through the buildings they'd design and the lives those buildings would touch, in a way, we'd never stop talking. Some conversations, I'd learned, transcend death. And some voices never go silent. If you believe truth always finds a way, share this story. Because some voices never go silent. They just wait for someone who loves enough to listen.